Introduction to Kryloff's Fables by Ivan Andreevich Kriloff. Selected and translated by C. Fillingham Coxwell, M.D. This LibriVox recording is in the public domain. Ivan Andreevich Kriloff was born in Moscow on February 14th, 1768. His father, a military officer, found himself at Orenburg during serious events. The poet Pushkin, in his History of Pugachov's Rebellion, says, "Fortunately, in the fortress there was a Captain Kriloff, a man of decision and prudence. He at once took command of the garrison and made the necessary dispositions. Pugachov swore to hang not only Kriloff but all of his family. Thus for a while seemed destined to death the 4-year-old boy who later became the famous fabulist." On leaving the army, the father went with his wife and son to Tver, where he became president of the district court of magistrates. The boy's education fell to the share of his mother, who endeavoured to encourage him in his lessons by a reward of a few kopecks, the money, as it amassed, being devoted by the child, under her direction, to small outlays necessary for his own benefit. Her subsequent plan of getting him educated under a French tutor with the neighbouring landowner's children did not turn out well, so the child returned to her care. Although she did not know French, she made her son read in that language before her. When the father died, the mother could get no pension, and the boy, then aged 11, obtained employment in the chancellery where his father had presided. Ivan's work allowed him plenty of time for talking to the common people in streets and squares and for listening to their conversation, and early impressions so gained became the storehouse whence he drew the racy and characteristic dialogues in his fables. But the mother did not slacken her efforts, and the boy occupied himself eagerly and indiscriminately with a trunk full of books which had belonged to his father. In his 15th year he composed the words of a comic opera in rhymed verse, the Kofienitsa, the fortune-teller by means of coffee grounds. Soon afterwards, under untoward stress of circumstances, the mother set forth to St. Petersburg in the hope of securing a pension for herself and a proper position for Ivan. They arrived in the capital in 1783. Everything was very cheap at the time. Thus this poor but admirable mother paid a servant only 2 roubles a year in wages. The lad had obtained a place at an annual remuneration of 25 roubles. 5 years later Ivan was left parentless, but as long as he lived the great fabulist could not recall his mother without the deepest emotion. On arriving in St. Petersburg, the youth turned his first composition to good account. A foreigner named Breitkov, printer and bookseller, as well as musical devotee, bought the Kofienitsa for 60 paper roubles, or rather for their value in certain volumes of Racine and Molière, which young Kriloff preferred to the Voltaire and Crébillon. The great French satirist doubtless influenced him strongly, and he was drawn to the heroes of Greece and of Rome by Racine, and soon produced a tragedy, Cleopatra. Having submitted this work to the judgment of Dmitrievsky, the famous actor, he called almost every day for the judge's opinion. After several months, Dmitrievsky said that he wished to read the piece with the author, and then explained its grave defects. A second tragedy, Philomena, finished in 1786, had no greater success. After the death of his mother in 1788, Kriloff entered the public service, but retired in 2 years, for he was drawn to literary pursuits and aspired to become an editor. He thought that a periodical printed by himself might bring him independence and fame. For several years he thus busied himself with magazines, the printing establishment, and new pieces for the stage. The Soul's Post, issued monthly, was interesting and carried on brightly, but in the course of a year it ceased from lack of public support. However, Kriloff continued the printing business for himself and his partners. In 1792 he brought out a new journal, The Spectator, for which a dramatic author named Klushkin helped to supply articles. Throughout his long career Kriloff used to recall his association with his colleague pleasurably. When this journal stopped, a new one, the St. Petersburg Mercury, took its place, but only lasted a year. It contained several poems by Kriloff, marked by literary finish and lively thought.
Sample complete. Ready to continue?